The night before my very first card show, I didn't sleep very well. It's not because anything was necessarily wrong. I just had that Christmas Eve anticipation, and so I was kind of tossing and turning all night long. My brain just wouldn't shut off, and I kept thinking did I forget something? Running through the checklist in my head, and it turns out I did forget something. What's up? I'm Taylor with Mount Silver Trading Company. I started vending at the beginning of 2025, and honestly, your first show is something that not a lot of people actually prep you for. I'm not talking about the setup or the pricing of your cards or how to prepare for your first show, but what it feels like to actually be in there on your very first day vending Pokemon cards, sports cards, whatever it is that you do. So instead of another checklist or preparation video, I just want to talk through the feelings of that day. The nerves, the weird moments, the wins, and the stuff that I wish someone would have told me ahead of time. The morning of my first show, I remember waking up feeling kind of behind and kind of anxious, and I couldn't really put a finger on why I was feeling that. I had done tons of preparation the night before, I had all of my stuff loaded up, ready to go, and then I realized as I was going through the checklist for the 15th time in my head, I don't have any change whatsoever to give people if they pay in cash. I had remembered to pull out a couple $100 in big bills so that I could buy something because I've seen people do that before. But then I realized I've got a bunch of cards in my binder that are like $2-3. If someone hands me a $5 bill, I've got nothing for them. So I had to rush out the door, try and stop at the bank and get some small bills on the way to the venue, and then still get there to set up in time. It was a hectic and chaotic start to the day. This is the one tactical tip that I'm going to give you today because I couldn't find any resources when I was trying to look online for my first show. As you're planning to bring change, I would bring about $200 total in bills. This will vary area by area or how much you're wanting to buy at the show, but if it's a small show, it's your first time, and you're not wanting to spend a lot of your own money, then about $200 should get you covered totally fine. All right, we get to the venue, we have our change, and I start loading in all of my stuff. I don't have a cart or anything, so I'm just carrying everything that I have by hand, one at a time, in and out, and I'm working up a sweat, man. I am busting my butt to try and get everything in there. And during that setup phase, I had a moment where I thought, man, I am in over my head. I was set up near a pretty big YouTuber at my first show. And watching him unload and get set up in what felt like a couple of minutes while I was fumbling around was really intimidating. And once I let that first little bit of doubt creep in and the comparisons start, it didn't stop there. I started looking at some of the other tables around me too, noticing their layouts, all of their really cool, expensive cards that I wish that I had, how confident they all seemed. On top of that, my own layout looked rough. I had probably 40 too many cards in my case, and so everything was crammed. It didn't look very professional. You couldn't really even see each of the cards differentiated from each other, and nothing looked how I pictured it would in my head. But here's the part that I didn't understand at the time. No one else around me was judging me. They weren't staring at my setup and making fun of the way that I was going about things. That spiral was entirely in my own head. And after doing a couple dozen shows at this point, I've realized you're really just focused on yourself when you're setting up. You're not looking at what the new person down your row is doing or what the person across from you is setting up. You kind of just stay in your own lane and everyone just does their own thing. All of those doubts very quickly turned into a rush of energy when the doors opened though. And at that point, everything felt real. At my first show, I was actually the very first table when you walked into the venue, and so I almost immediately got overwhelmed with people as they were coming in. In hindsight, this actually set really bad expectations for me for future shows, because I was expecting as soon as the show starts, it gets busy and it stays busy. In a lot of future shows, I was actually further away from the door, and it took people 30 to 45 minutes to filter through all of those front tables before they got to mine. If at your first show you're not set up by the entrance and things don't get busy right away and you notice people going to other tables but not your own, don't panic. It's very normal for people to kind of filter through the room and get back to you over time. We're going to keep drilling into my insecurities here, but at that very first show, I also noticed people would come in and then immediately walk past my table, even though it was the very first one that was set up in the room. And that made me really self-conscious. I realize now that that's just kind of the nature of the game. There's a million different reasons that people could come in and walk by, whether they're going to meet up with someone or they have a specific vendor that they have a pre-made deal with that they're trying to get to, or there was just something off in the distance that caught their eye. It's not an indictment on your product or your table, and you can't take that personally. Just try and maximize the experience for the people that actually do stop. At pretty much any show, foot traffic is going to ebb and flow throughout the day. I remember during my very first show that I had made a pretty big purchase. At the time, it was about $250 or so. I had bought a 151 Charizard. This was, I think, the most expensive or second most expensive card in my case at the time. And right after I made that purchase, foot traffic died for a little bit. It was right around lunchtime, so people were going out to the food trucks, sitting down for a meal, and it slowed down for a little bit. And I got really nervous. For my own mental health, the timing could not have been worse, and I sat there for 30 minutes and did an absolute spiral thinking that I threw away all of the money that I had made at the show up to that point on this card that I wasn't going to sell. And I promise you, if I left that very first show having the tough conversation with my wife that I didn't sell anything, I wouldn't be where I am today. But like clockwork, after people finished up their lunch, foot traffic picked up again. I actually ended up trading that card away about an hour later, and it really helped propel my momentum for the day. One thing I learned in that moment, though, is that slow periods are actually really beneficial for you as a vendor, especially if it's a longer show. Taking advantage of those periods to do things like sticker new cards that you took in, backfill holes in your case or in your binder, take a sip to drink or a bite to eat, or just rest your feet for a minute can be really helpful in getting through those long days. A couple of things stood out to me that day. I don't remember exactly what my first sale was, but I do remember that the binder was a big hit. At the time, I was having cards in there from $1 to $15. Now I actually have two binders, one for modern cards up to $20 and then one for vintage up to $20. And the binder continues to be a hit at every show that I go to. I love having them around, and I learned that lesson pretty early on in that show. The other thing that I learned is that trades can build momentum at your table very, very quickly. I mentioned the 151 Charizard earlier that I had purchased. Someone actually came up to my table at that point with a Giratina V alt art about an hour and a half after I bought the Charizard, and they were looking to trade in part towards that Charizard. At the time, that was the most expensive card that I had ever owned by a pretty wide margin. I think the Giratina V alt art was around $600 or something, and I thought it was totally out of reach for my very first show. But we figured something out that worked. We took the trade in at 80%. They got their Charizard. They got a bunch of really cool sealed stuff that they were going to rip open as well. And then I started doing the math on the trade when I got home. I realized my cost basis on that $600 card was like $350, $400, something like that. And that's when it clicked for me that trading is always more beneficial than just selling cards if you can help it. Obviously, the liquidity and the cash now to be able to make deals in the future is great, but you can get your cost basis to almost nothing if you are spinning trades after trade after trade. By the end of the show, I was feeling this really weird buzz. I was super energized because it was the most fun that I had had in the Pokemon card hobby in a long time. I got to connect with a lot of great people that I'm still friends with to this day, made a lot of really fun deals, and I got to talk about Pokemon cards all day. Like, it was awesome. I was also exhausted. I was standing for probably 12 hours that day. I didn't really sit down all that much. I didn't have a lot to drink or eat. My feet were killing me. And so I had this weird tension between being really energized and excited and really tired and exhausted, and I ended up crashing later that night. But more than anything, looking back on that first show, I learned so much about how to connect with people, how to build a reputation within the hobby, and how to enjoy what I'm doing while I'm still treating it like a business. The one thing I didn't really understand at that very first show, though, is how much the vendors around you matter. I was kind of treating it as a one-man show, lone wolf, whatever you want to call it. But making connections with the people around you opens up a ton of opportunity. That being said, there are a lot of unwritten rules at card shows. Things that no one explains, but everyone kind of notices. And how you handle them affects your reputation way more than you would think. In the next episode, I'm going to talk to you about vendor etiquette, how to build good relationships, how to avoid bad manners that you didn't even know were bad manners, and why all that stuff pays off in the long term.